Grab some torches and a rusty sword because today we are dungeon diving into the dark and unforgiving world of Dark and Darker. Dark and Darker, aka a Dungeons and Dragons game that ends in 15 minutes because the DM absolutely hates you and you only roll natural ones, is an extremely unforgiving and harsh first-person action RPG that sees you and up to 2 friends attempting to survive its dark, dank depths. Somehow I omitted this exciting and extremely fun new addition to the extraction genre in my latest video, so it gets its own dedicated video to make up for it. Currently available as part of the Steam Next Fest as a free demo, Dark and Darker is a beta and it definitely shows. It's extremely hardcore, and you know what else is hardcore? You! If you like this video and subscribe, or follow the link in the description below for some awesome discount games at 2game.com, a trusted retailer of keys directly from the publisher, and make sure to use code PUNGLES for an additional 5% off. While it's definitely a work in progress with many features still to come, like character customization and a class, skill, and proficiency system, Dark and Darker, even as bare bones as it is still some of the most fun I've had gaming in a long time. It's the game I never knew I needed until I played it. Like other extraction games, Dark and Darker drops you and other players into a world littered with loot and enemies, and whatever loot you acquire, you keep, if you survive. And trust me, survival is hard in this game. It is really challenging. I think I've successfully escaped the dungeon maybe 5 times, but granted, I am awful at most things. But even though I haven't succeeded, it's still been an absolute blast attempting to acquire awesome gear and get out. It's just such a compelling and engaging gameplay loop and can result in some really fun moments, and it's really quick. You can just jump in, do one quick raid, and see how you do. Dark and Darker places a lot of emphasis on its loot, and it is extremely valuable, which I think is great, and it's really one of the most defining aspects for me so far is just how exciting it is to actually loot chests and enemies to see what you get. One item can completely decimate an enemy player or turn the tide of your dungeon crawling, and that is such a critical component to these types of games, and one where a game like Call of Duty's DMZ falls short. Loot in DMZ just feels so arbitrary and boring. But in Dark and Darker, finding a much needed health potion or magical armor piece is just such a great feeling. It makes it that much more intense as you try to escape with your newfound goods. Dark and Darker wears its influences on its sleeve, and while that may make it feel a bit generic to some, for me it's actually somewhat refreshing. This isn't really a game that's pretending to be some deep or complex fantasy world. It just embraces so many elements of classic tabletop games and other older RPGs. This is most obvious to me in the class system, which makes no attempts to break out of the cookie cutter classic fantasy tropes found in, well, pretty much any fantasy. With 6 classes available in the current demo, I think they are really pretty self-explanatory, with each class featuring unique attributes and skills. It actually really impacts the way you approach encounters, depending on your class choice. The fighter is of course your classic sword and board frontline brawler, with the most versatile weapon and armor selection, but lacking magical abilities. The barbarian is your howling rager with huge weapons and damage, but painfully slow in pretty much all respects. The rogue is of course your sneaky stabby with the ability to use daggers and move much more silently. The ranger is your long-range option using bows and crossbows, as well as traps. The wizard is your primary spellcaster, really low defense, but with insane one-shot spells at your disposal. And lastly, the cleric, your heavy armor support and healer. The classes are just so, well, classic and well-known that it adds charm to the setting of Dark and Darker, reminding me of classic D&D or games like Gauntlet. Although they really need to revisit the name. Dark and Darker is honestly probably one of the worst video game names I've heard in quite a while. They just could have done something a little more interesting. But again, each class has unique abilities and some really fun, unique interactions, like the rogue's ability to pick locks that makes you want to create a well-rounded party with your friends. And as always, I'm sure there's a meta team makeup, but right now, as everyone's just kind of discovering the game together, it feels really fun to just roll in with different configurations of classes in your party. And you will want a party. While a new dungeon has been added for solo-only players, so at least you aren't getting gank squatted by 3 people, playing solo is still extremely difficult, as even one enemy poses a significant challenge. Enemies hit hard and take no mercy, and healing is an extremely short supply. While healing and other items will mostly be looted during your actual dungeon dive, other supplies can be purchased from a variety of traders. These require gold that, you guessed it, you need to loot and extract with as well. Gold isn't really that difficult to acquire though, as most loot you find can be sold for quite a bit of it, but again, that does require you to survive. If tough as nails skeletons and zombies weren't enough to deal with, you will also have other players to fight as well. So far I've only seen one friendly interaction in Dark and Darker. 99% of the time, players were going to go for the kill as quickly as they can. Running into an enemy team, desperately trying to land hits while avoiding traps or AI can be extremely fun. However, that does bring me to the overall jank of the gameplay. While it can add to the charm in a way, invoking old school RPGs like Morrowind, the combat does also invoke things like Morrowind. Melee fighting is slow and sluggish and inconsistent, with strikes you swear should have landed missing completely, and painfully slow reactions making things like hitting and running almost impossible at times. And ranged combat isn't really much better. This isn't a super polished combat system or in-depth combat system, although there are some little intricacies that can give you the edge in a fight. The game is just straight up janky, and there's no way around that. And just spectating, you might wonder what all this fuss is about, as honestly, it can look pretty terrible. But once you dive in yourself, get a feel for the combat, feel the oppressive dungeon atmosphere, and loot and survive and kill your way to victory, it just grows more and more fun. Dark and Darker has absolutely insane potential, and I can't wait to see what is next for this exciting RPG. I hope you enjoyed the quick overview. If you did, let me know if you want to see more Dark and Darker content while the demo is still going. We only have a few days left, so jump in while you can. That's it for me. Until next time.